All right, man. Thank you all who are joining us tonight on another episode, Unfiltered Kings and a Queen podcast. Ivan, man, we got my boy, I'm a square. Ivan here, man. What's up, man? Long time no see, man. Glad you could join us, man. Look, I'm glad that you all can join us, man. And so kind of join in, man. Jump in the comments. Let me know you're here. Of course, we do this for you guys. And so we want to welcome you back to season 4. Season 4, man, on Unfiltered Kings and the Queen podcast. As always, I want to thank my co-host. I can't do it by myself. Starting off with Carlos. He was in the trenches with us when we first got out the gate. Of course, my Masonic brother, Frankie, that you guys have seen recently due to schedule changing and then life just happening, won't be able to join us. And then also the queen of the crew. Cannot forget her, Diana, by way of Virginia. Definitely with school starting back in, there's greater responsibilities for the queen, but she wished she could be here. But hey, I still want to mention them as they do a lot and have done a lot to get us here. Unfiltered Kings of the Queen podcast. You can now follow us, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Make sure you go in whatever those platforms that you use on a regular day basis to kind of keep up with the latest episodes. And then also, man, try to go back, kind of see what we've been doing since season 1, man, going on 4 seasons. And so we look forward to get you guys feedback, dialogue, and things of that sort. Of course, welcome to those who are watching us on Facebook Live, whether that's on my personal page, or if you haven't done so already, please go join our Facebook family. I do say family because that's a community that we're building. If you want to share something, if it's something that you heard or you want to talk about on here, of course, our inboxes are set up to where they're definitely confidential, but we always want to hear feedback. And so tonight, man, I want you guys to kind of join in on the conversation. I think we have a great one. Man, let me shout out to my man right here, man. As always, before we get started, we're going to get off into this healing why black. I know that can be controversial for some people, and then can be interesting to others. But, man, we're going to try to navigate those waters and talk about this, in my humble opinion, also needed topic in today's society. But, man, I want to kind of shout out to my boy, Ivan Parker, man. I'm glad that he's tuning in. Thank you for the congratulations on 4 seasons. We actually started, believe it or not, in his studio. That was a great opportunity. Schedules wouldn't allow us to do that consistently, but hopefully, there'll be some synergies there that allow us to go back into that setting. And so he definitely welcomed us with open arms, taught us a lot of things about even just kind of the sound and imagery and things of that sort, because we were new in the podcast game. And so, man, I just want to personally thank you, my Masonic brother, for tuning in and also supporting. And so with that being said, let's jump into this thing. Again, we want to welcome you back to Unfiltered King and the Queen podcast. The podcast where men and women talk to each other and not at each other. And so even from time to time, instead of having those conversations to each other, we kind of separate and say, let's have some conversation for ourselves, right? Let's get understanding within ourselves and challenge some of these norms within ourselves so that when we come together, we can have a healthier and a more beautiful and more meaningful conversation. So I think this one right here is going to allow us to kind of go back into our own personal spaces when it comes from a gender standpoint, and it's going to allow us to hopefully understand some of those things that we bring to each other, what is kind of going on. And so again, I'm interested into your comments. I'm interested into your feedback. So make sure whatever form that you're watching us on, man, chime in. I want this to be a conversation. Even though my cohorts are not here, I definitely want to engage with you guys. And so tonight's episode to me is very personal. It's raw, but it's necessary, like I said. We're talking about healing, right? And we're not just talking about surviving. I think a lot of times when we talk about healing, the closest we get to is just the emotions, right? Are the emotions okay? Can we just kind of go on and things of that sort? But we're not just talking about surviving, just kind of make it to the day-to-day until, time kind of make that thing distant from us. I'm talking about actual healing while being black. And that's 2 components, right? And that's why we labeled tonight's episode the way we did. There's healing and the connotation of healing, but then there are some things within the Black culture and Black environment that healing, we have to admit, looks differently. And hopefully we're going to explore that. What I want to do is start with a quote from my book. For those of you who don't know, if you can see that I'm on a green screen, not for sure if you can see it, but if you go to my page, you'll be able to see it. My latest project, Think Better to Be Better, a guide to mental wellness, normalizing what it is when it comes to approaching the well-being of our mental state. There's a quote I want to share. And again, just chime in if you're watching, if you haven't gotten here already and you just gotten here. We're talking about healing while Black. Healing while Black. The quote says here, healing begins when we stop performing strength and start practicing honesty. And we're going to, from the time to time, kind of extrapolate that quote from my latest book, Think Better to Be Better. Healing begins when we stop performing strength and start practicing honesty. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment, right? Healing begins when we stop performing strength and start practicing honesty. Now, if that quote hits home, just take a breath and really just take that in. Because oftentimes, we as Black people, we celebrate, sometimes even to a fault, being strong, even in places where we should admit that we're weak. And so there is a form of healing that we never get to because we celebrate it, right? And really what it is, we're putting up a false sense of dealing with it, right? So we celebrate it. Well, I'm strong, and we even perpetuate, hey, I'm strong, ain't nothing wrong with me. You know, even some of our Christian counterparts, and yes, I am a believer. Hey, God got me and things of that sort. But the reality of it is, have we truthfully healed, or are we talking ourselves a good game? And so that's why I thought that quote was so important. Healing begins when we stop performing strength. And that's something I want to kind of talk about right there. We have to quit making people be okay with things that they're not okay with. There's no strength in dealing with something where you're not properly healed at, right? You don't walk up with somebody with a broken arm and, you know, just say, hey, you know what I'm saying? Hey, you good, man? You're going to be okay. No, we got to get some help, right? Something happened with your body. We got to get some help. And so I think a lot of times, especially with things that deal with our mind and our mental well-being, we're so quick to celebrate it and say, hey, you know, get over it. You're good and that's okay, especially in our Black culture, because we came from a time, not to digress, where we had to kind of, you know, pull our own curtail, so to speak, had to strap our own boots up, so to speak. But the reality is it doesn't work that way, right? As a matter of fact, the thing that we need to heal from sometimes get worse, right? And so really keep that in mind. Drop your example in the comment at a time that describe what healing means to you. And again, you know, we're very transparent here. You know, we have an open dialogue. So if it's something that you don't feel like sharing to the masses, remember, you can always inbox it to us, where that is a very secure and safe space for your comments. But for the most part, I want this to be an open dialogue. Think about what healing means to you. So we were talking about the quote from our latest book, Think Better to Be Better. Healing begins when we stop performing strength, right? We all want to be strong. That's all a great thing and a great feeling. But the reality of it is, if I'm going through something, if I've been through something and I just need some help, that proverbial false sense of strength can be causing me to not get the help that I need. But then it also says start practicing honesty. And that's where I want to kind of land our conversation right now. How can we get to a point where we can be honest and open with each other, right? And I'm not just talking about the friends and strangers that you work with and, you know, you see down the street and in the grocery market. I'm talking about even in our supposedly intimate relationships, within our family, within our core friends. It seems like a lot of time we have adapted the yes man mentality, even when we're not looking for yes men, right? We have all these relationships to where there's no robust meeting of the mind. There are no true differences that allow us to stretch ourselves emotionally. And all of a sudden, when life presents itself where we need to do that, it seems like all these things kind of come back and we see different people, right? So we're not even talking about people that we see on the street and things of that sort. Even there are times where people right around us, we do not allow ourselves to truly heal. We just have to kind of deal with that thing over and over and some of the ramifications of it. And it's almost like picking in a sore, right? That sore will never heal. And even if it does, it'll heal on its own, which a lot of times that's what we do emotionally. We just kind of let the thing take on a life on its own, but ultimately leave scars, right? Anytime you had a scar or a sore on you and you didn't properly take care of it, well, yeah, it'll heal, but it'll leave a long-lasting permanent scar that you can actually see. So we want to kind of talk about some of the things. What does generational trauma looks like in real life? That's something that, again, we don't talk about, right? It becomes taboo because a lot of time we practice more loyalty. And I'm just talking about in the Black community on these things than we do love. You know, we don't want to kind of rock the boat. I think we talked about that on one of our previous podcasts, to where, you know, we say the right thing. We never address the real thing, especially if some of this trauma comes from family or friends or come from our upbringing. We can't say any of these things. So we just kind of, quote unquote, swallow that vomit, so to speak. So we never identify these traumas that we're passing down from child to adult, and then they pass it down to their child and grow up as an adult. So it becomes more of a generational trauma that no one is talking about. And the only sense of healing that we have is the fact that time went on. Well, just like we talked about that sore, what have you, that leaves those scars are passed on down too. Let's talk about emotional shutdown, right? We kind of talked about that in a previous episode, to where, you know, usually men are taught, hey, we don't have emotions, right? We're not supposed to show emotions. How much trauma is being led from just that thought process? You know, we talked about from a baby boy. If he shows any hurt or pain, we associate that as the weaker vessel, or that's being a feminine trait. But think about how much trauma, even from a young age, sometimes even from infancy. You know, when we're walking, we tell that young baby boy to get up, hey, quit crying, right? And so that becomes an adopted ideology. Where is there a chance to heal when this child grows up and he is not able to deal with his emotions, right? And then also on the flip side of our female counterparts, you know, they're taught that, hey, because they are women, they are supposed to be emotional, right? But are they taught how to talk, how to deal with those emotions, how to articulate those emotions, right? Think about how much trauma comes even within that, right? Even from a young a baby girl, if you're taught that, well, you're okay in showing those emotions, but you can't articulate them, you can't explain them, or you don't know how to act on those emotions. Well, could you imagine how much trauma that could be now when they go into their second community of, you know, going out to school, trying to get into a boyfriend, girlfriend relationship, so on and so forth. Well, there are so many emotions that they haven't dealt with that turns into trauma. And then, like we said, it's been taught from generation to generation, even though there's a recognition that there is healing needs to be done. But because of the suppression of these emotions, there's no chance of healing, even if it was right in their face. And let's talk about hyper independence. Now, this is one that we see a lot, right? We see the hyper independence a lot. And this is the one where we reward ourselves. And again, and I'm talking specifically to the Black culture, of course, we try not to paint one broad brush with everybody, right? So there is some nuance in there. But that hyper independence is one that we see so often and we celebrate, to where there's past trauma, past hurt and pain from someone that was allowed to get close in, usually a family or friend, you know, or some type of relationship bond. And now the solution is, I don't need anybody. And if you dig deeper into that I don't need anybody mindset, if you will, that's because I don't want to allow anyone to get close to me again to potentially hurt me in the way that I was hurt in the past. And so from the onset, that may sound like, well, that's a good idea, right? Well, yeah, we're supposed to use discernment, right? But the reality of it is, sometimes that hurt that we deal with, We got to get some healing on that, right? Like it's not enough to say, hey, I'm not going to allow anyone else to hurt me again. But what about the damage? This is what we downplay, the damage that some of that healing's done, that damage that some of those things that happened in my family has done to me. Now that I'm at a point where I can make my own decisions, think on my own accord, how does that hyper independence stagnates or altogether suppress these type of traumas, right? And so what happens when we see all these behaviors start being distributed, it's easy just to justify them. Well, that's just how I am, right? You ever had someone who just tell you, hey, that's just how I am. Well, I'm just going to be me. Well, you just got to understand me. All these things become justifiable means of not dealing with the actual hurt and the pain and the trauma there. And so therefore, go back to our topic, healing while Black never happens, right? All these traumas, unfortunately, become an identity of who we are as a Black community. And I think that's the biggest disservice that we don't talk about enough, is the fact while we're walking around here defending ourselves, right? Hey, I don't need anybody, that hyper independence. Well, what is it looking like, all that trauma that we're packing down as a community of Black people? You know, some of those stereotypes, if you will, that are associated with us comes from the lack or the inability of us getting true healing or going through some type of true healing process with the trauma that we just kind of throw out there. And even when the help comes from within, right? Even when the help comes from family or friend, because I don't need anybody, that trauma just gets packed down. And then the last one is distrust, right? That's something that I personally talk to people all the time that I actually deal with from past experiences. And sometimes keep in mind that sometimes you can get healed from these things, but sometimes your healing is not always getting over it. Sometimes your healing is how do you manage that thing, right? There is no getting over it. Like an example I gave before, common cold, you get over it. Take pills, get over it. Cancer, AIDS, some forms of cancer, AIDS, well, you have to manage that. And so that healing is not just in the removal of that trauma so that, you know, it won't affect your life or no one else may see you, but it's actually doing the actual work. And so that distrust is real. And that's where you find it with a lot of the conversations that we have here on Unfiltered Kings and the Queen podcast, is that usually by the time we bring the conversations together as man and woman is usually versus, because there's a lot of distrust from the last man or the last woman that we respectively went in a relationship was in. And so now we bring these fears and these phobias and this trust into this newfound relationship. And keep in mind, we don't know how to articulate it because we never talked about it, worked through it, and have a healing process within ourselves. So what happens, we eventually clash, right? Go back to our corners, right? And so again, there you go. There's no true healing involved. So if you're just joining us, we're talking about healing while Black on Unfiltered Kings and the Queen podcast. The Queen is out tonight. Of course, those who are used to Frankie and Carlos join us, of course, their schedules have different, but they're definitely a part of our family. We will always big them up for the contributions that they've done and the contributions that they're willing to do. And so you guys are stuck with me for tonight. And so don't leave me lonely out here. You know, let's chime in. We're talking about healing while Black. And we talked about a preface there with a quote from my latest book on mental wellness, where the quote says, healing begins when we stop performing strength and start practicing honesty. And so we start talking about those things in which we fake strength just to appear normal and appear that we heal versus dealing in within our honesty. And how can we allow ourselves to operate in our honesty so we can get the healing that we have? But let's talk about another topic here, how silence has become survival in the Black communities. Now, some of these topics here, I do want to say that they may be intimate and sensitive to the audience. And so if that's the case, keep in mind that we'll remain as objective as we can, but we feel that there are just some topics we have to put on the table to really get to that part. How do we heal while we're being Black, right? And so that silence how it becomes survival into Black family. Well, first of all, that's the most erroneous thing we can do, right? There are a lot of things that go off and go that happens in the Black community that we sweep up under the rug. And so it becomes more of a survival thing to those who are associated with that family and associated with that community, because there's no true healing. And we're talking anything from incest. We're talking about mental deficiencies, whether it's hereditary, whether it's generational. All these things, are passed down and they become silent, right? And so we start being in survival mode, trying to perform to be normal to our families and our friends, right? All these things that may have happened within our families, or, even abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse as a child, being cheated on in your relationship, coming from an abusive relationship. All these things, we click into survival mode. And because life goes on, we associate that with healing, but it's not. We learn to just kind of mask it, right? Like old saying go, we just kind of sweep it over the rug and keep going. And a lot of times, our communities are the ones that's forcing us to suppress it, right? It's usually if we come out of a family that we dealing with abuse, or we dealing with infidelity, or we dealing with incest, all these topics right here. Well, it's probably going to be usually your family members want to kind of keep that up underground for fear of being exposed from a legal standpoint, from a social standpoint, what other people's going to think about it. So all these things we sometimes learn to suppress, and then we click on that survival mode. And here we go out into society where that survival mode is not needed. What's only needed is for us to show up. And because we're so used to surviving, right, we never heal. As a matter of fact, we take some of the residual effects of those things that we deal with in our first community, and they smear themselves on the other relationships, such as that second community, boyfriend, girlfriend, friends that we meet in our particular associations. And so that's one thing I want to make sure that we take the time to unlearn, right? How silence is a survival tool in Black families. Again, with this practice continue going and on, it becomes a generational trauma. And I'm pretty sure if you all have seen, man, this can be taxing on future family members that probably was not even born at the time that this trauma even started, right? And again, think about it. These traumas on the outside looking in, that some of our counterparts, right, put up on us. Well, a lot of times we get upset with that and we rush to defend it, but we haven't taken the time how that silence in our survival that we celebrate, or that false sense of strength, feeds into some of these narratives, right? Because although we may think that we're healed, one thing I can tell you, a person who's actually been healed, they can see right through it. And so if we go out into this community where they can see right through it and they call it out, are they really talking about us? Or are they really telling us our uncomfortable truths, right? I want to do a personal reflection right here. I used to think that being quiet was being strong, but turns out I was just scared, right? If I told you guys some of the things that I went through as a young kid, I learned by osmosis that, hey, just be quiet. As a matter of fact, I was telling someone the other day, that's how I started writing. Things I didn't feel like I could tell anybody. When you go to school, you don't want to be joked on. You don't want to be picked on. So I just turned to my writing to tell these things. But what I really learned in reality was that this silence, this being quiet, it wasn't being strong. It was just me scared to produce my own voice. I was scared of what people were going to say about me. I was scared about how people would treat me. I was scared about what people would think about me. So I just stayed quiet, right? Again, practicing that silence. That silence is just going to eventually make me heal. But I'm here to tell you in my transparency, there were so many other issues that I took on and I had to deal with from a negative standpoint because I never healed. I was just assimilating to those other communities that I went out with from my family, whether that's boyfriend, girlfriend, going to college. I just assimilated. I was talking to some of my frat brothers over the weekend while I was telling them, the things that they remember me doing in college, that was just a part of an act, right? That was a part of my silence because I didn't want anyone to see my honest truth. But the trade-off to that is, they didn't see it, and I created some good memories, but I didn't heal. And so when I stepped into those real moments of society, those true communities of, relationship or child rearing, having my first son, shouts out to James, San Angelo State, after representing starting his junior year. But when I started stepping into those responsibilities, even as a husband, at one point in time when I was a husband, I didn't have the skill set to do those job responsibilities, right? Because there were so many things that I hadn't healed from because I suppressed it in my silence. But then also they became triggers. They became branches of other harmful, negative, emotional things that I had to deal with. And so it went into a point that I had to quit self-medicating. And so just being transparent with yourself, ask yourself, what are those places that and it's usually those things we wouldn't tell nobody, right? We all got best friends and we got, frat brother, Masonic brothers, sorority. So we got all these close knit entities, even family members. But think about that one thing or several things that we wouldn't even tell them, right? Even if we had the space. What damage could silence be doing where we're fabricating strength, but the reality of it is we're just scared, right? Breaking the silence. We've been talking about healing while Black, right? We've been talking about some of the fake ways in which we say that we actually heal. And keep in mind, you guys, not only is this just talking about relationship, I know we talk about that a lot on Unfiltered King to the King podcast, but even think about it in our second and third communities, right? The world imposed on us to be silent. Don't talk about it, right? Even if you want to talk about in our society how, some polices are killing our Black and brown kids, actually babies, if you will, or grown men or grown women, and then, put it on TV and guess what? Be silent about it. We can emotionally binge on social media, but for the most part, taking that trauma in and not having any solution to how do we heal, that's another form of being silent. And then we have to be strong to get up and go to work the next day. We have to be strong and set our loved ones down. I'll tell you, one of the hardest things I ever had to do was talk to my son in a group of his friends when our late brother, Trayvon Martin, was murdered, right? I never forget, he was in middle school and him and his friends was walking home with their hoodies on. And I'm coming to pick him up and I'm seeing them walking with their hoodies on. And this was fresh off of the Trayvon Martin tragedy, right? And I never forget, I, swooped him up, put him in my truck, and I took him to McDonald's. And it was a hard conversation to have that what they doing wasn't wrong. It's not wrong to wear a hoodie, but because of the world that we live in, it's probably not the best idea, right? And so that was a hard conversation to have, but I did want to lend my voice and not just be silent, right? Act like nothing has happened and hey, they'll be all right. And, show that false sense of strength. Well, if something happened to my son, well, guess what? Trayvon Martin was someone's son, unfortunately, right? They didn't ask for it. Pretty sure they would have protected their son if they were there. So you have to have those conversations. So what we're talking about, part of healing while Black is that we have to normalize giving ourselves space to have this voice, such as this podcast, right? Even when I was thinking about doing this podcast, we were sitting and thinking that, this probably won't be one of the popular ones where, everyone wants to open up in this format, and that's okay, right? But we always want to respect privacy, but we have to address the fact where we're walking around thinking that we're fake healed, but we're just really putting up walls and and boundaries to hold the emotions in our silence, and we truthfully haven't done the work, right? We truthfully don't have a true outlet that we can actually go and do the work and actually heal, so that this trauma won't throw itself into a generational trauma that we're passing down on our innocent loved ones, right? So we want to talk about breaking this silence, right? Think about the cost of being silent, right? And a lot of times we're silent without even realizing it, right? Because life just goes on. And so some people throw themselves into a job. Some people just go quickly get in another relationship and just assimilate. Some people isolate, right? They don't find themselves going out as often. Some people turn to vices, just kind of numb themselves. Well, I want to take a few moments and just get the audience to understand how costly it is being silent. Think about the broken relationships that come from this silence, right? Think about the relationship. Now, I'm not talking about just the dysfunctional relationship, but I'm talking about the relationship where you or the other person did not realize the help they needed. All right. So you had to make a decision, kind of like Diana had said one episode, to where, man, you got to make a decision to own your own peace. Or maybe there's a relationship where we thought the other person was wrong because we could not see that we weren't healed, and they had to own their own peace and leave the relationship behind, right? Think about the broken relationships in families. Come on, I'm specifically and intentionally talking about our Black families, where we know that thing happened in our family, right? And it grows and grows, and people grow up and they hold grudges and they have resentment and they have anger and they have regret. And so now that family line is strained or is non-existent, right? You know, we meet our friends outside and they're closer than our family members because guess what? We never talked about that thing. You know, you remained silent while I was hurt, right? You told me not to talk about it. Hey, you downplayed it when I brought it to your attention. And so when we talk about the costly broken relationship, it's not all the time just a romantic relationship, right? You think about people who go from friend, boyfriend, girlfriend to girlfriend. You think about people even a professional level, right? Sometimes there's trauma there, and we just kind of go job to job and career to career, I'm gonna change career, and we never learn how to properly heal from the trauma. And look, let me say this. Trauma can be found in any aspect of our lives. I want to be very clear with that because, of course, normally on our podcast, Unfiltered Kings and a Queen podcast, we talk about the romantic relationships, or we even venture into the familial relationships, right? But trauma can show up in any type of interaction you have with another human being. So whether that's in your professional career, whether that's in your personal career, whether that's within family, whether that's in your personal relationship, whether that's in your father's wife, parent relationship with your children, as long as there are imperfect human beings, trauma can show up. And when it shows up, we must not assume that we've healed with some of these misnomers that we've kind of talked about, right? The one we always talk about, hey, let's just be strong at it. Hey, I'm okay. I'm good at it. No, that's not the case, right? So really focus on those broken relationships from the cost of being silent. What about the emotional fatigue? I was just talking to a good friend the other night, you know, and we were talking about how our jobs, she's a teacher, and we were talking about how it's not necessarily that our jobs are strenuous per se, but sometimes just the emotions, the emotional bandwidth if it takes just to do your job at a high level, sometimes can be overwhelming. This is a space, you all, that we don't talk about a lot, and I talk about it in my book, Think Better to Be Better. We're so used to having just to be okay. Tell ourselves we have to be okay because we got to get the tasks done, right? We got to assume the responsibility. That responsibility got to be there, and that's true. But a lot of time we pack down so much emotional trauma so we don't even realize, and we easily say it's my body fatigue. But have we taken the time to realize that, hey, this muscle right here gets tired? No, short patience. We really don't want to deal with it. You find it a lot of time where people don't even want to have nuanced conversation. Everything has to be low hanging fruit. Everything has to be a low level, and then some even make a mockery of having intellectual conversation. And usually when I see people like that, it's a telltale sign that they're emotionally fatigued. They've completely excused themselves out of a space to where it is draining, and they just want to get one or two word answers. Hey, I just want to have fun or whatnot. And I'm all for that. But then what does that do to the true healing? If we cannot have an honest and open dialogue about things we're going through, like I said, where trauma can show up in any space, then how can we get to true healing in any capacity? Okay, I got AD Johnson. Thank you for chiming in. They say grief is my silence, isolation is my silence, and I have noticed that about myself. Absolutely right. You're spot on. And let's talk about this. So there it goes again, that we can find that trauma in other spaces. So AD, I'm glad that you chimed in. When it comes to grief, usually it's silent because guess what? There are numerous ways to deal with grief, right? Let me say that. And so a lot of times the initial healing, AD, that comes in is people trying to solve that healing the way that they deal with their grief. And that's just not the case. It's not cookie cutter, right? And so when you see that and there's no true initial answer, AD, the automatic thing to do is just to be quiet and deal with it, right? And that's where we, as a Black culture, we celebrate, hey, I'm going to be all right. Hey, I'm going to be good. Man, you're going to be okay. Oh, girl, you're going to be okay. But that's not true, right? Because in order to vet whether or not I'm capable of dealing with that grief, it's okay that I talk to someone. It's okay that I open up a book. Let's normalize these things. It's okay to go get some help and listen to a podcast talk about those topics. Find someone who's an expert in grief. Same way when it comes to isolation. We talked about on a podcast episode, AD, in the past about the difference between being alone and loneliness. It's okay sometimes to be alone. It's the loneliness that can get us into some danger because it puts us in a situation where, remember I talked about last time, where I make up all the rules. And so whatever I have to do to fulfill that empty space, sometimes we find in isolation. Well, here it is, that silence don't allow us to vet those things, right? That we're isolating ourselves in silence. Whatever that outlet is in our silence, we give ourselves permission. And that's where a lot of people, and definitely not including you, but where they turn to their vices. They start living those double lives because in that isolation, there's no one to talk them through the parameters of, hey, what's right and what's wrong? What's the best way or most effective way in handling grief instead of that silence? And so I appreciate that transparency, AD, that you shared, because what I'm trying to convey to everyone is how that silence that we have used as a tool is really to our actual detriment. And so just like AD was transparent, we find ourselves in other capacities, whether it's grief, whether it's isolation, these things can be precursors. So if we don't get help on that thing, they just only open up doors for us to get other things wrong. And so again, we're talking about healing while Black. How do we heal? How do we heal as a Black people? There are just some things, there's some nuances that we live in this world that are different, right? Instead of us fighting Black men and Black women, we as a culture of people, there are just some things that are different, right? It's not prejudice, it's not a race thing, but it is a reality, right? You look at police brutality, you look at some of the racism that is still left in today's society. You look at some of the things that our government, our government is doing. These things, we have to find ourselves still addressing them, but we still got to live. And like the old adage says, life doesn't take any commercial breaks. And so these misnomers that we put out there, just be strong, or hey, just don't say nothing about it, whether it's from our society that we're getting this trauma from, all the way down, like we talked about sometime in our first communities, whether that's whether that's mental abuse, physical abuse, incest, anything that causes trauma. If we don't get that help on it, we take it out into our second and third communities, and then it becomes generational, as we talked about, right? And then that creates other problems that we run into people that could be good fits for us, good spaces that could be good fit for us, but we never question ourselves, right? Because we make up all the rules at that point in time. Let's talk about modeling vulnerability, right? Because there's one thing to tell someone, don't speak out, right? Talk about it, right? And again, I can understand, and I appreciate you, AD, for sharing what you did. I can understand, although some people put too much on social media, but I digress. Social media probably is not the best place to put some of these topics out here than talking about these traumas, right? But on the flip side, that is one thing to tell someone to talk about their issues, even if they find somebody who they're comfortable with, even if you're talking to a counselor, psychiatrist, so on and so forth. How do you model that vulnerability? And I want to start particularly within our Black men, and I'll tell you why. I want to start with my brothers. Again, we don't paint them with a broad brush, but typically there are times where Black women express their emotions better than us, right? Because they've been taught to, right? They've been taught that that's what women are supposed to do, or they've been allowed or afforded spaces, or sometimes they're better at creating spaces in our society to where they can have honest dialogue about how they feel. And so, because of course I don't want to speak on that gender, so I want to kind of focus on Black men and how do we model vulnerability. Black men, we have to quit celebrating each other in the sense of false strength. We have to quit celebrating each other in the capacity of a few words equal healing. It can motivate in that moment. It can motivate and stir a positive emotion in that moment just to cope with it. But we have to make a big differentiation from coping and true healing, right? And we have to start by doing that by normalizing men have emotions. And we have to quit this toxic masculinity to where any man that deals or expresses their emotions, we equate it to them being feminine. That's a woman thing, or we negate it, or we down it, and things of that sort. Humans are made of emotions. So that means emotions are a human thing. They are not a man or a woman thing. And so when there are emotions that we've assigned to women, brothers, we have to have each other's back. When men hurt, when men are sad, when men are done wrong, we have to validate that and normalize that and quit just associating that to being a woman trait. Because I think a lot of men, we have grown up and been taught that, right? We talked about when we shed tears, suck them tears up. I'm going to give you something to cry for. Why you crying? Be a man. And so over a period of time, that's where toxic masculinity comes from. We develop these toxic images of what being a man is. Now we go to our counterparts and we wonder why we clash with them. All of it is not on our women. Fellas, we just got to own that, right? Sometimes we bring that miscommunication in to probably where a space where they're probably used to, or let's be honest, they're probably more nuanced in having these conversations, right? Where they could truly be our counterparts, but because we've never had these conversations, we've never had these training, here we go again. We've never been able to truly heal with these things we've gone with. And so we mute ourselves. And that's one of the things that you find with men and women is that while we're quiet, we don't say nothing, and then we flip it. Well, they want to talk and they want to do this. Well, that's a human thing. How else can they understand us if we're not willing or have the capacity to talk about how we truthfully feel? You guys know I talk about emotional intelligence all the time. Even in the first chapters of my book, Think Better to Be Better, I kind of break down the 4 pillars of emotional intelligence. Even amongst ourselves, man, we have to be able to articulate that I don't have to hate you. I don't have to knock you. You don't have to be a bad person. if I have an emotion that's atypical to you. Even in our disagreements, that silence that we put on, or that strength, that we talked about earlier, well, I'm hard in it. What is that resolving? We pass that down to our young boys. And then we wonder why when they go in their second community of schooling or that third community of relationships, why they're bad with expressing their emotions. Where did they learn it from? We got to own that, right? And so what I'm saying, man, we have to find a way to model what this vulnerability looks like, right? That's not saying that we just always complaining, or we're just, overly sensitive to every emotion that we may feel. But it does mean that we should beg the question, how do we model this vulnerability and what does it look like? And so, for example, one thing that I've started with me and some of my close male friends, whether that's my son, frat brother, Masonic brothers, or just guys that I know, every Monday at 8 o'clock Central, we have a call, and it's called a check-in, right? And in this check-in, man, we just talk about our day. And we don't just talk about it on that surface level, man, where we just kind of ashamed to kind of go there. We talk about how we feel. We talk about things that we're going through. How does it really make us feel? What do we really look at and wish would be a solution there? And it's okay. Some of those things we can't control. Some of those things, even that hurts us and we wish was better, the reality of it is we find ourselves that we can't change them. But what we find is just to be able to talk about them. One thing that my LB is so good at is that he bounces those ideas off. We bounce those ideas off each other, young and old. So you have my son who's going through something at a 22-year-old that us at 40 some years old, we can bounce it off of him. And then there are things that we're going through that he gives nuance for as, hey, man, I'm going to have to go through that, right? So that's another way of modeling that vulnerability, not just a group of guys sitting around. I remember we were talking about this, and I forget who it was. Matter of fact, I think it was this weekend with my frat brothers, how, yeah, it's good to sit around, watch football, and do all these things that, typical men do in our circle. But the beautiful thing about us that usually the most of us, when we're meeting up now, even when we're doing those spaces, somehow, some way we get on a conversation to where we're talking about life, right? And we're talking about perspective, not just, hey, this is what I'm going through, but we're talking about perspective. And then it turns into this beautiful space to where we're now commenting and we're giving each other advice. And so that's just one way that we can model that vulnerability. We first have to acknowledge it and then normalize it, right? Get off this toxic masculinity that men don't have to talk. Men, you're being soft if you talk about your emotions, things of that sort. Certainly there are certain people in certain spaces that, we would rather to err on the side of caution. I don't recommend putting your, things on social media like that are so nuanced to where, you can let so much energy and so many people who are, quite frankly, not experts come in. But the reality is you want to make sure that you have some type of space to where you can tell your actual truth. Then when we're talking about safe spaces, man, there are plenty of safe spaces out here, especially on the precipice of COVID. There was more of a push on mental wellness, and even more here lately. Mental wellness has been more of less of, I would say, of a taboo topic. And so there are such things out there, man, as therapy. A lot of us who are working, for the most part on corporate jobs or jobs that offer, decent insurance, man, they have EAP programs to where you get certain number of sessions for free to talk about any type of problems. A lot of these times they're free and they're confidential. So again, going back again to my black men, healing while black. A lot of these struggles that we're probably dealing with, we're probably making them worse by not getting any help on these things, even when we have the outlets, if you will, to get said help, right? So by internalizing them, by muting them, by these false sense of strengths, instead of just going and getting that healing, we wonder why we have this one issue and then we have an offspring and all these other things. So therapy is a great opportunity. There's a lot of great podcasts out there where you can have space, where you can listen to dialogue, listen to other people's stories and things of that sort to kind of get an idea that, first of all, you're not alone. That's another thing, like AD alluded to, that isolation sometimes can be a danger because it makes you feel that you're all by yourself, right? And so now you start making up your own rules, your own regulations, everything that you think of is law. And now when it's time to go out in the real world, you're more argumentative. You're more walking away from real relationship where they're just trying to tell you, man, it's not personal. It's just, it doesn't work that way, right? But because you fixated over so long that this is right, it's almost like going to the doctor and you convince the doctor that he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Just because you don't like the news or you don't like the way that it was received. And so now you're getting further away from that true healing. And now there's a false sense of healing out there. And man, that's where the terminology, I believe, hurt people from, right? Group chats. Like I said, man, we have a group chat, man. Get your group of your friends, man, where you can talk real about it. And if you don't have anybody in your circle of friends where you can talk truthfully and honest, at least one, then I suggest you to revisit your circle of friends, and then it doesn't matter what title. I'm not talking about a title here either. You should have someone within your circle of friends. And this is why it's important to differentiate friends from associates. It's okay to have associates. I have some 10 and 20 plus year associates, but that's okay. That's not knocking them. But then I have some friends that I've met in a month or so that we've built the relationship of that if it's hit the fan, I can have an open and honest and transparent conversation with them. And so that's our responsibility, right? Like I said, again, it's good that we have people to kick it with and things of that sort, but we better make sure. And here's the thing, upgrade that circle. It's seasonal, right? You don't wear a jacket 24/7, especially not here in Texas, right? You don't wear shorts 24/7. And a lot of times, let me say this, we think it's always personal. And sometimes just based on the season that you're in, it's just like if you're in Texas heat, just in that season, it's not personal. I just don't need a coat in that season, right? I'm going to save my coat for the winter. So it doesn't necessarily have to be personal. It just could mean that person and your season, they're not assigned to you in that season. And so let's normalize that instead of throwing people away or making people the bad guy because we agree differently. You never know what that person is going through in that season. And how about we just kind of set aside or step aside until that season comes back around? And sometimes everyone in your circle won't recognize that. So it's up to you to have that responsibility and have that tenacity to say, hey, this person's not a bad person. I don't have to throw them away or start a beef. It's just the season I'm in, especially if I'm in my healing season. This person just can't, quite frankly, provide me what I need in this season, right? And even just on this mic here, man, I would be wrong if I didn't say that, man, what we're trying to do is create a platform here on this microphone, just like AD did, chime in, have those conversations, on all our platforms. Those inboxes go directly to me as a certified life coach. I know everything about being sensitive and making sure there's a safe space and protecting privacy. It's something that I give my own clients that we sign off on. And so that infrastructure was built just in case if you ever wanted to share something that was too heavy for normal social media or social media eyes, you can find great spaces such as Unfiltered Kings podcast to where you can share those things, or you can just put simply, I have to talk. And we'll find some type of way to where we can have that dialogue and conversation. And hey, if the solution is not in the house, then the great thing about us, we're going to plug you into somewhere where you can get the help you in. But the main thing is not remaining silent. That's the main thing. If you ever felt unsafe expressing emotion, think about this. You're not alone. Sometimes it's not people who don't want to say anything. It's just the fact, in all seriousness, they're not in a safe space, right, to speak up and say anything. There may be an adverse reaction to them speaking up. So just keep in mind, that's why it's important to at least have one person in your circle where you can tell your proverbial truth. Excuse me there. So we're just going to quickly recap here. Healing While Black, Unfiltered Kings podcast. We're talking about, man, how can we get the true healing, right? Not this proverbial fake healing that we find and, hey, I'm being strong. Or, hey, I don't need any help. Isolating, building generational trauma by not dealing with it. Or sometimes mom's the word, right? I'm just going to be quiet. I won't tell anybody. I can just build this fake character like I did in college, knowing that I'm dealing with a whole lot of things that are eventually going to affect everybody that I meet from there on out. So how do we really get to that true healing? And so we've been talking about, first of all, normalizing it, right? Breaking that silence with our actual words, looking at our surroundings, right? Being able to get some places to where we can get true healing, whether that becomes family or friend, whether that's a trained professional, somewhere within. But we definitely know that fake strength and silence allows us to keep that trauma in. And so we wear healing as a mask and we force others in society to accept our norm. And then that clashes and that affects a lot of relationships, right? We put it on the other person, and the clinical term is gaslighting. We put it on them because we never want to look and realize that, guess what? Excuse me, you never truly healed, right? You just kind of went on. We talked about the scar mentality, right? I didn't take care of that scar. And so, yeah, it healed, but it didn't heal correctly. It left the scar. And we never know when those scars may affect and or hurt other people in our society. So we make them the bad person when they speak up on it versus saying, you know what, let me look back on this thing and be honest. Yes, I may feel that I'm healed, but what happens if it didn't heal correctly? Everyone I come in contact is going to be able to see that scar, whether that's from a professional level or even from a personal level. So let's just talk about how counseling can be used as a reclamation as we end this thing here. Of course, I'm a big proponent of counseling. Counseling has changed my life. I tell people all the time, if you knew me growing up or if you knew me in college, I'm a completely different person. And it's not because of me. I take no credit for it. I take the credit that God has put some truly powerful people in my life. And let me say this, even when they were in my life, the change didn't come. Be transparent. See, a lot of times we think if we go to therapy, if the change don't happen right there, then therapy don't work. That's not true. True, there are some times where one therapist is more counselor is more effective than other. And so, yeah, you want to kind of vet that out. But to throw the whole thing away, and I think our Black culture does this a lot, is that we think that therapy is transactional, right? You go in the store, you want this item, you give the money, you walk out with that. That's not the case. Excuse me. Remember when I said that sometimes we get over things, sometimes things have to be managed. And usually, you guys, the longer that thing goes on, the further that it has been in our family, the longer it has been since we've been existing in our childhood, the harder it's going to be to us to try to get over that thing rather than it is, hey, you know what? This is going to have to be a give and take. I'm going to have to take this in bite-sized pieces. So, excuse me, understand therapy isn't fixing anything. That's another thing. No one likes to be fixed, right? Therapy is freeing. I'm going to say that again. Therapy is not about fixing. Therapy is freeing your mental capacity up to where you can see what changes you need to make to be the person that you truly want to be. A lot of time we frown on therapy, and even sometimes that's the danger of family and friends, right? That's why sometimes you have to just go to someone professionally. Family and friends want to fix you because they have their idea of who you should be. That's not what therapy is about. Therapy is about freeing you up of this trauma, setting this trauma to a side, understanding this trauma, and then you insert yourself. What type of person do James want to be? Right? I had to ask myself that question one day. But in order to do that, I had to be very transparent and true with who I really was, even if that's my perception, right? And I realized, hey, I'm not a good person. There are some people out there that I care about don't think I'm a good person. So because I want to be seen as this, I need to be free of this trauma that has been here so I can identify what type of person I want to be. Counseling helps separate inherited pain from personal truth. Oh my goodness. A lot of time when we go through things in our family, that pain is inherited, right? And so even though we go along and we learn how to be what we call a functioning dysfunction, we know how to function with that trauma, but we haven't told our personal truth. So it becomes this thing that we mask. It becomes this thing that we stay silent about. And it becomes this thing that we sow that false sense of strength. And so counseling actually helps separate that inherited pain, because a lot of times people take stuff out on other people and they don't even realize why they're doing it. They really think it's who they are. They have assigned it as a part of their personality because there's no nuance when you talk about it. And so when they hurt people, they don't realize it, right? But they're dealing with that inherited pain because they never sat in a space where they can tell their personal truth, right? And so that's another component, excuse me, and benefit of counseling. It allows you to separate that inherited pain and deal with that in order you can be able to tell your personal truth. And so we want to make sure that we're reframing therapy within our Black community, right? Let's quit telling people to deal with it, suck it up, put it in God's hand. Yes, I'm a believer in God. Yes, I'm a Christian, but sometimes God will have these resources in space for you to go use, similar as a doctor. If I break my leg, you don't tell me, hey, doc, man, Jay, God's going to take care of it. No, that's not true. I better get myself to a doctor, else I'm going to be in a world of trouble. And so we have to start normalizing that same ideology when it comes to maybe sitting on someone's couch, or even like I had a conversation the other day, even if sometimes that means that we have to take medication, right? I know that's a taboo. That's a conversation for another day. But if it means me bettering myself so I can better understand my emotion, so I can better put myself in a position where I can compliment those who I come in contact with in my other community, then I owe it to myself to give myself a chance. Therapy is not weakness. It's rebellion. It's saying I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. It's giving ourselves permission to not indict ourselves as bad people, but it's giving ourselves permission to understand that for all intents and purposes, this trauma, no matter where it comes from, whether it was self-inherited or it comes from our past, it's a rebellion saying, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of faking. I'm sick and tired of being quiet. I'm sick and tired of walking around acting like I'm strong when I know I'm not. And it frees us up to simply get the help that we need. So I want to close with one other quote, if I will, from my book. It says, your healing is not just for you. Your healing is not just for you. It's a blueprint for someone else's freedom. In a world where we always say, don't be selfish, we usually talk about material things, right? Don't be selfish. Share with other people. Be kind to other people. Be kind to the less fortunate. What better can you give to anyone than a better version of yourself? Your healing is not just for you. It's a blueprint to someone else's freedom. Not all relationships, not all friendships, not all bonds break up because one person was bad. One person was wrong. Both people were wrong. Sometimes those relationships suffer an untimely early demise because one or two people have not got the true healing in which they need to be able to promote the emotional intelligence to be able to do conflict resolution. So in this day and age, it's easy just to throw each other away. It's easy to go silent. It's easy to stop the phone call, quit coming over and replace them with people. and interchangeable. It's easy to do that, to really just instead of deal with the problem at hand, right? Relationships, 10 and 15, 20 years, you've heard of getting divorced, right? How in the world you spend that much time with someone? And we understand things happen, so we're not talking about that. But do we truthfully vet? Is it worth it? Do we keep it? Friendships, bonds that we've had for years, misunderstanding, we just throw it away and we just, fill it in with something else that's useful. Have you truthfully healed? Have you truthfully, are you willing to do the work to make sure that your healing not only helps you, but it becomes the blueprint? There you are, even if someone is wrong, right? We talked about that, you, them, and the invisible enemy. Even if they're wrong, if this person really means something to you, could you at least offer them the blueprint to truly heal? You can't force them, you can't make it, but think about that. If this is true family, if this true friend, and we have these true bonds, what if your true healing can provide the blueprint? Do we take on that responsibility, or do we just assume low level thinking, well, that person's a bad person, throw them away and just replace them with someone else? We have been talking about healing while Black. I'm glad that we was able to have this conversation. This is one of those, when I always say this is where we could really do a part 2, and we may do a part 2 and come back and kind of tackle it. But this is not one of the ones that are so popular, if you will. And this is one that I understand why a lot of people wouldn't kind of share in this medium. But like I said, if you want to just hit me up and talk later, one-on-one, if you just put in the inbox or somewhere where you're looking, hey, let's talk. We can talk about it more in detail. But healing while Black is a very nuanced and important topic, because there's so much trauma that we deal with as a people. And I think we celebrate it erroneously and too much within strength, and we mask it in silence. And we teach these things within our respective genders, men and women alike. And unfortunately, you have a lot of unhealed people walking around here who is validated by the world, in which there is no true healing. There has been no professional assistance. And then we clash within each other. We break up that friendship. We break up that family. We break up that professional relationship. And then because there is no healing over long term, it turns into generational trauma. To where now we're teaching it to our kids, or our kids subconsciously see it within us. And we quickly just label it as a discipline problem because it couldn't come from us. And so we have to break this chain, ladies and gentlemen. This is one where, again, where men and women talk to each other. This is not a versus, as we always said. We have to break these chains by doing some work on ourselves, identifying how can we be more emotionally intelligent within ourselves. And then when we come together, we can display not only something that builds long-lasting relationships, but then we can reverse some of these traumas that even on the outside societies kind of prey upon and stereotype us on. Look, you guys, this has been a great one. Keep in mind, Unfiltered Kings podcast, Unfiltered Kings of the Queen podcast. I don't want the Queen to kill me. Unfiltered Kings of the Queen podcast. Remember, you can now follow us on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, on YouTube, and on Amazon Music. And later on this year, we should be on Apple Podcasts, if God says the same. I appreciate you guys being my audience. So if you didn't catch it here, remember, it'll always be on other platforms where you can watch it at a later date, tomorrow at work or driving into work, things of that sort. I want to thank those who did chime in and did give their transparency to it. Look like we have another one here. I want to make sure I get all of my people's comments. AD said, my daughter started her therapy sessions back up about 5 months ago. But her junior year at Townview, I had her in therapy. And then when she got to college, she made her own decision to start therapy back up again. Man, look, let me shout you out. Normalizing that help. See, a lot of times, AD, when we grown and adult and we done made all our rules, we don't need help. You ain't going to psychoanalyze me. You ain't going to critique me, man. Trying to read my mind. And so it's too late. So that's why our society and our culture have a bad stigma when it comes to therapy. So you're absolutely right. You're doing a phenomenal job by normalizing that at an early age. And what's lost in here, and I know this is not in your topic, but I want to shout you out. There had to have been a recognition of breaking your silence and also acquiescing that, look, I don't have to have all the answers, right? We do a lot of damage, and I'll raise mine, and I'm guilty of this, AD. I love my son to death. He's a junior, looks just like me, but sometimes I had to realize I don't have all the answers. See, sometimes we allow our loved ones not to get the help they need because we get caught up in titles. I'm mama, I'm daddy, you should come to me. Have I been trained professionally to? No. Again, that's just like if my son have a broken leg, Lord forbid, and I'm down there trying to take, man, I'm going to take him to the experts. I'm going to take him to the doctor. They don't have no indictment on me being a good father. No. Being a good father is recognizing my limitations and getting him the help he needs by the professionals that are out here. And so I want to commend you on that. That's a great example in there that's implying that, hey, even if I can't do it or I know that I won't be effective throughout, let me get you and point you in the direction at an early age so that you can get the help you need as my daughter. It has nothing to do with just me being a parent and things of that sort. And I love the fact that ultimately what it seems like she made her own decision because it's already been normalized. And so a lot of times, again, to break that stigma, when we hear our family, when we hear our friends, our close friends are going to counseling, don't tease them, don't mock them. We don't know what they're actually going through. Let's support them. Even if their support is just, hey, look, I don't have nothing to say, but hey, do you? Hey, if you got to disappear for a minute, hey, I'll be back. You walking with open arms, no love lost. Like I said, it doesn't always have to be something negative. And so, like AD gave an example, if you model that, and see, that's her modeling that vulnerability for her daughter. Because think about it, it has to be a very vulnerable space. And I'm not putting words in your mouth, AD. And if I am, cuss me out in the inbox, but tell me, in front of the podcast. But that is a very vulnerable space with her daughter that she loves, that she's almost have to relinquish to someone else, and whatever comes out of that thing, she has to support it for the most part, right? That can be a very vulnerable space for us as parents. And so I think that's a great example how we model that vulnerability even in our family center, because usually in our family center, we practice loyalty, right? Sweep it under the word. Do as I say, not as I do. Well, that's not teaching the child how to love themselves. If they have an issue, even if it can't be dealt with, hey, even if dad is wrong, and I am guilty of this, if James was on here right now, he'd probably give you a whole lecture on it. Calm down, son. But I was guilty of having the right idea, but the wrong process. Because I came from a culture of, hey, since I'm daddy, that's strength, that false sense of strength, right? And what it did, AD, and what it did to the rest of y'all, it caused my son to be silent. He tried to get his help in silence. Now look what other problem that presented for me, right? Now he won't talk to me. Now I don't understand him. Now I'm trying to pry the jar open. So to AD's point, it is very fortunate, and we have to normalize at an early age that it's okay if we don't have all the answers. The whole goal is that she wants baby girl to get true healing, right? And I will say this again and again, when we mention these colors and whatnot, that's not a knock to our counterpart, but we're saying we're focusing on us, right? Healing while black. She's a black girl that's going to eventually be a black woman that already has to go in society and deal with something that mama can't change. So why don't I normalize that right now and give her the freedom and the space to speak her truth and not indict her to the limitations that AD may have. And so thank you so much for sharing that. Look, we have to have this conversation again. Thank you, AD, for chiming in. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and giving your transparent truth, especially in this day in society. We have to quit muting people. We have to quit laughing at people when they finally do get the gall. It's more than just saying don't be silent. But again, we have to model what does that vulnerability looks like. In this day and age where people look at social media as the end all be all, sometimes that contribute to people just being silent, right? And we never want someone to be in that space. And then we look up and unfortunate, either life has taken them by storm physically, they're going through and they're doing bad, or sometimes, what we don't talk about in our Black communities, even if they decide to take their lives because they didn't feel they had anybody to talk to. And so that's why it's important that we address healing while Black. There's a certain space, there are certain nuances that we as Black people go through. And so our healing does not necessarily look like our counterparts. But as you've learned tonight, hopefully there is a lot of things within our community that we kind of have to readdress, revisit, whatever, if you will, because we could be contributing to a false sense of healing that's only going to lead to more trauma. With that being said, I don't think we have any other comments. Again, thank you all for your comments. Keep your comments coming. I read them all the time. I respond to them all the time. We want the conversation to go on. We want you all to be a part of this conversation. Understand this has been another episode, season 4, man. We getting up there. We thank you so much. We cannot do this without people like AD, without people like Ivan, and all of you all have chimed along on our social media atlas. This has been Unfiltered King and the Queen podcast. Remember, please go like, follow, share, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon Music, and we'll be on Apple Podcasts later on this year. But until then, remember, this is the podcast where men and women have conversation to each other, not at each other. Make sure when you log off from this, go have a conversation where it's not at each other, but to each other. Y'all have a great night. Again, thank you guys for tuning in. As you guys can see, I want to mention this also. We was going back and debate, man. We got some good feedback. We understand that, look, football season is here. We understand we have some avid football fans, and we want to make sure that you can watch your team and you don't have to, make a decision, because we love the live interaction and the live feedback. So we made the decision to move it to Tuesday to allow you guys to kind of have that day. So that way, if your team is playing, you don't have to worry about picking and choosing, because we want to keep that feedback. And so hopefully the next time you hear from us, everybody's team would have played. And so hopefully I wish you nothing but bad luck to your team, because, yeah, that means my team will be doing bad if your team is doing well. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so thank you guys for being versatile with us. Thank you for migrating with us to Tuesday. We wanted to be sensitive to that because we do record live. And like I said, we want your interaction there, and we don't want you to have to pick and choose, for those who are avid football fans, to choose our space versus, whatever you do for your football team. So thank you for pivoting with us. So until further notice, if we find that it's working on Tuesday, then we'll try to hold that down. If we find out and we get feedback that, hey, Tuesday's okay, then we'll have that discussion. Once again, you guys, I want you guys to keep my co-host in prayer, Diana, even with Carlos and Frankie, even though they stepped away because life said so. Continue to keep them in prayer. We could not have done it. We could not have made it here without those gentlemen. And even still with the queen of the podcast, keep her in prayer, and hopefully she'll be able to return next week. But until then, thank you guys so much. Thank you guys for hanging in there with me, going over a little bit. And until next time, you guys have a great night. Remember to follow us on all social media podcasts. Talk to you guys later.